Okay, so this is the first question from our TSL members Q&A call on Sunday, January 10th. Woo! And we're in the middle of a workshop, so it's crazy. Like, there's a lot of lack of sleep going on and crazy family stuff. So let me just make those excuses right now. But here's the thing. We got a question, and this is kind of a common, popular question. And there's a lot of things that where like any company is going to have its own philosophy and those types of things. So, and I realize a lot of the guys who are on the membership site might have a lot of different things playing at them. And I don't want to make this about right or wrong. What I want to make this about is how we can get those specific results for you. But we are going to have to learn a little bit of the language that, we're coming from here. So it's basically like, hey guys, I want to master my day game. I find myself having lots of excuses of not doing approaches during the day, but it's probably because of the anxiety thing, and that's something that everybody goes through, super common. I know how to get over it and manage it by bringing awareness to my body. But if there's any tips to motivate me to commit to my skill set. So there's a couple things, and then I went on to ask a couple questions like, what is your goal of, day game? Like, what do you want from that? Like, what really is the end goal, and where do you see yourself going with it? The other thing that I asked is like, how do you manage that anxiety within your body? Because there's a lot of different ways of saying it. And social anxiety and approach anxiety are two different things. And the pickup industry has had like basically one answer or two answers to it, but with 40 different versions. And, whatever. I think that it has always fallen short on answering or really solving those things. So basically, the first thing is like our goal of meeting people should not be, and this is where it's a TSL philosophy thing, we want to step away from dividing it into these compartmentalized things of basically like, is this day game? Am I going to get the approach? Am I going to get the technique? Am I going to get the measured skill? Now, everybody who's doing this is like, well, holy shit, dude, how am I going to get results without measuring, these things? Or how am I going to get results without marrying myself to a technique? See, the thing is that, we're born to be social, all that sort of stuff you've heard me say before. So the idea is that if we can get in a social mode, and I'm not talking about like being in state RSD style or anything like that, but if we can really express, like just be our expression, be who we are, and broadcast that out to the world and have people reciprocate with it, technique then has a whole different meaning of leverage. So for instance, we're in the middle of a workshop, and basically one of the guys, or both of the guys who are out with me this weekend, it's like, how can we just get talking to people and meet people without any pressure? And it's kind of cool because Nick Sparks, who also lives in Austin, and we like help each other out with different workshops and stuff. But one of the key overlapping things that we always do is it's like, man, look, let's just talk to people. Don't do things which are fake. Don't do things which are not you. Don't do like social pressure exercises to pump yourself up, but just casually talk to people where you're going to get a real expression. Man, woman, girl who you're not interested in, person who's whatever, low value, high value. And when we can get into that mode, then we can relax. And that is actually the best way to ease any anxiety. Anxiety, by default and definition, is the fear of what is not known. And the more we have to prove ourselves, the more we have to do something or execute an action, then by default, we have to have that anxiety. And I actually don't know any seduction teachers that don't develop more anxiety as they get into this, because it's kind of like we buy our own bullshit, myself included. It's like, I'm going to do this technique. I'm so good at it. If that pressure is always on me, I can't be social and free. And to be honest, there aren't any measurements of being social in the nature of being social, in the nature of being sexual. I'll bring it back down and not go too far off into those things. So basically the deal is that our philosophy is like, we want to get talking to people and not make it a big deal, so that when we see a hot chick or we see somebody that we want to talk to, we might be intimidated by, we can walk in with an expression and not a distortion. The other thing too is that doesn't mean that you can't practice the different social anxiety things that you might have, or approach anxiety things that you might have of getting in touch with your body. But realize that the only thing that will ever make a difference to you calming that or having a grip or an awareness on that is to be social, to be your expression. Okay, that is the only thing that will help. Everything else is a band-aid. Everything else has a reaction that comes to it, and it won't stabilize. So that's really what we preach, is like, how can I make being social normal? How can I make whatever it might be, meditating normal? How can I not have it be dependent on being a big deal in order to get a result or share something along those lines with it? So in daytime, all that says to me is it's a situation, and it's a situation that has lower energy, which is like 90% of how you're going to meet people. A club is high stimuli. So a bar is actually what I would say generally low stimuli. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of different distractions. There's not a lot of crazy choices. There's not something where our like sympathetic nervous system is just being hammered with like fucking, music or gunshots or 10 other people trying to talk to him. That's high stimuli. So in daytime, it's low stimuli. So all you really need, and this is actually another thing that came from our workshop this weekend while working with these guys, is it just kind of came down to the simple thing, like, how can I get somebody to pay attention to me for 15 seconds? Now, what I mean by that is I would put my money on, and again, this comes from teaching, this comes from my own experience, and this comes from my friends who are just also really good with women. I would put all my money on somebody being able to get somebody to pay attention to them for 15 seconds, to create the situation of somebody to just listen to them and talk to them for 15 seconds, than a specific technique that was so married to like, all right, I'm going to do an opinion opener. Okay, that can work. I'm not saying it's bad. I do them all the time. I'm going to hit with like a really shocking thing and calm it down. I do that too. I did it yesterday, and that's fine. That can work. But if we marry ourselves to that technique, we get away from the truth of being social. And that's that's why everybody goes in a big circle with pickup and yada, yada, yada. Okay, so how can we get that thing, that situation that's really going to make it work, of somebody to pay attention to me for basically long enough for them to calm down? Okay, and so this is what happens. Anybody approaches and they say like, hey, excuse me, you're really beautiful, let me talk to you. And this is like, it's like, be direct as an act. So you're really not being direct. Like, direct game is such a distortion, and people who practice it are generally like lost, fake dudes. And that's kind of what's happened. But you can be direct as a technique, or you can be direct as being yourself, and they're two different things. Being direct as yourself means that you're that way in every way. So you can approach and be direct by, the pickup terminology of going like, you're so beautiful. Or you can approach and you could say like, hey, I just wanted to talk to you. I actually have a question, and it has to do with attractive women. Whatever it is, like, you could do whatever you need to do to get that conversation to happen. Okay, but here's what happens within 2 seconds of that. And this is what nobody looks at. Okay, she is going to be startled for a second, and then she needs to relax. So if we know that's going to happen, then we could start implementing techniques like buffers. Okay, so this was one of the things that I was saying to the guys that I was working with last night, was like, well, just go up and say whatever. Like, there was some pretty funny stuff. Like, one was there was a couple that looked like they were breaking up. And it was basically like, well, I'm going to go in, like, what do I say? And then we really thought about this, like, just as kind of a funny little thing. And God, dude, it was like, hey, I'm going to ask you something. You can answer this if you don't want to, but it looks like you're having a really, really intense conversation. Okay, so at the point of hey, like an interrupt, that's it, just the hey, what does this guy do? He adds a buffer. Hey, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but you guys looked like you were having a really intense conversation, and like, I was just curious what's going on. And they actually didn't answer the question. But this is the key social dynamic part that will always happen. Hey, wait, why is this guy talking to me? Hey, let's calm this down. Hey, what is he coming up and saying to me? Like, and then the dude went in and said like, look, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. The other thing is the guy, one of the clients of mine said, one of the things that we'll do is like, if you ever talk to like waitresses or strippers or any hired gun, I'll say, well, what do you want to know about him? And I really want to know what you want to know. So if I ever ask you that, it's like, I want you to tell me, like, I want to know if she like is sexually attracted to me. Fucking man up and actually say that. But that wasn't the case. It was like, I want to know why she doesn't shave her belly hair. Like, anytime you're nitpicking at like one singular quality that gets in the way of your sex life means you're not having sex, and you're in a fucking judgmental mode and not in a social empathetic mode or a sexual mode of exchanging intent. So anyway, it was like, okay, how do we ask that? It's going to hit her in the face. So literally the first thing I said to her was like, hey, I want to ask you this, and like, it may offend you, but I'm not meaning in that way. So you ready? That's a buffer. Okay. Another thing that might happen if I'm thinking about like last night and the prior nights before, you go up to somebody and you say like, hey, I got a question for you guys. An opinion opener, right? Or whatever you want to talk, or an indirect opener, whatever you want to say. What's going to happen immediately after that is you're going to give a buffer. If you look at old school pickup, like, hey, I got a question for you guys. And then they do a false time constraint. Essentially the same thing to lower the guard. If you go direct and say, look, you are just really, really beautiful. And, at the moment of saying that, the girl is thinking like, oh my God, I'm being hit on. Like, well, wait a minute, what's this guy saying? I'm half taken aback. Like the original direct stuff with Shark and Bad Boy was like, you're the most beautiful woman in the world, and you give your presents and you say stop and yada yada yada, and then you would back off and say like, well, what is your name, or where are you from, and you'd ask AFC questions. But even in a modern day game, you'd say like, look, you are really beautiful, I had to talk to you, and then you buffer it. Okay, so social dynamics wise, that would be the first thing that I would do to get that 10 to 15 second window of somebody paying attention to you. And here is literally it. If you get that 10 to 15 second window, and I wouldn't necessarily think about the time, I just throw that out there because that's generally what it is. It's really as soon as she relaxes, then you can move directly to qualifiers. Okay, and what I would say is move to rapport cycles, which is a TSL thing, which you have, if you're on the membership site, you can look at the Formula 69 video 3 and 4 and I believe 9, and the instant connection course, like you should be doing those to get that, and they're all available and there for you. So a rapport cycle is basically you start off with a qualifier and move to a ground, and then you continue to challenge them with that. And the goal is not to challenge them or have more value or whatever, but it's actually to build a connection from it. And it's literally like the quickest and fastest way to get rapport instantly with somebody, especially if you're in a low stimuli setting, hence daytime. And you can, of course, do it in a high stimuli setting too. You just need isolation. It's just in daytime, or you generally have isolation built into it. And then if you wanted to have a date, it's going to happen again at the social dynamic point. It's going to happen right here as soon as she shows her real self. And this is actually interesting. When we were talking to the waitress yesterday, I was talking to one of the clients left, which you should never do. But I mean, he had a legitimate thing that he had to do after an hour and a half. But like he left before it got good. So one of the things that the client who remained, and then another guy helping me out, what had happened was she opened up, and me and my friend Noah, we caught it. It's like, oh man, she's open, like shit. And Noah's like just a guy that's good with chicks, and he's like, yeah, now's where you'd make the move to like, this is where I'd get her number, see if we could hang out. Okay, and the guy who I was working with, is looking through the template of TSL and the structure of social dynamics. And so basically the thing is I was asking him, and plus he's a very technical guy, and he may not be as good at reading people as myself and Noah, who know a ton of experience. But basically, it was like, what is that point? What is that point? All it is she showed her real self and allowed for you to look at it, to assess it, to judge it. And so you're like, what the fuck is that? Okay, what is that? And it happens very quick in a conversation. It will happen very, very quick. So you have to be able to read that. So a lot of times in pickup, we look at qualifiers, like what are you passionate about? And if they answer it, they've given something to us. But a lot of times you say, what are you passionate about? And they, say, well, music. But it's not really them saying it. So you have to be able to learn to read it. It's like, what are you passionate about? Man, music. Well, what does that mean? I mean, like, I love music too, but when has it changed you and what has it really meant for you? And when they can start being themselves and talking about that and truly expressing it, that is the point where you switch to intent. Okay, so it's a lot of shit here. First, social anxiety. What we want to do is our whole goal for social anxiety is not a trick. It's to be social. If it does not get there, it will not be solved. There's a reaction that will come to adversely affect it in some way, whether that's a social pressure exercise or freedom exercise, whether that's like I'm feeling anxiety, so I'm going to do this to mask it, beat it, defeat it. It will always come back, okay? Because it's a form of control, all right? A force of nature cannot be contained in control. It's all this like science and philosophy or whatever you can go to. I mean, like nature does not need science. When you put boundaries around nature, it will break it. Man needs science to understand nature and so on, yada, yada, yada. There's all these TSL philosophy things, right? So you have to be social. Number two is the most important thing that you can get in any daytime situation to have it carry over into either rapport or seduction. And those are the only two options are going to be, or friendship, which is rapport essentially. But in a seduction mode, it's rapport or seduction. That's really the only two veins that it would go, is that with rapport, actually either of them, you need that 10 to 15 second point where they can allow themselves to be them. Okay? So that's kind of simple. Whereas it's like, that's all I'm looking for. I don't care what technique you use to get there, but that's the point you need for them to relax. And within that, they're going to be surprised or open, but either way, that's a reaction and that needs to calm down. Okay, and so one of the techniques that we talked about was a buffer, but there's all sorts of shit. Okay, one's not better than the other. It's how do we get that result? Okay, after that 10 to 15 seconds, which is quite quick, and it could go quicker than that, how do we get them to show their real self? Probably the best technique that I know to teach verbally would be rapport cycling. There's other body language stuff you could do. There's touching stuff you could do. I don't give a shit, actually. I don't fucking care. What is the quickest way I can get them to show their real self? Okay, in any part of it. It could be the sexual side, it could be their emotional side, it could be whatever, but how do I get them to show their real self? And at that point, once that happens, then I can move direction and intent. And what direction and intent means is that where it switches to seduction, or that's where it says, it switches to like, oh wow, this is somebody that I'm not gonna sleep with, or maybe I'm gonna be friends with. Like, man, how can we talk later? How can, we continue this relationship? So that's very simple, and that could take 2 minutes, that could take 2 hours. Yesterday with the waitress, like I was saying, it's probably about an hour and a half, but that's also because it's a waitress and there's a lot going on. But of actual talking time, Samson, I recorded it, so you can actually, if you want to splice that up. But it wasn't all that entertaining, but it was probably like 10 minutes of conversation. How can we get to, get social so we're not anxious, we're flowing, we're happening. How can then we get to that 10 to 15 second interaction so that they're calm? And then what can we use to get them to show their real self? And then how can, once they show their real self, we move that into direction, rapport, or direction or intent. And that is the social dynamic. It's very simple and very easy. Get to those points and that will actually get you results. What I will say is, with all the experience of teaching in this industry, those are also going to point out your sticking points as well. Anxiety, you might be opening people to anxiety and accomplishing the 10 to 15 second thing. But it's like, that's a sticking point. The getting somebody to pay attention to you, that's a sticking point. And then it's like conversation, banter, rapport techniques, conversation building skills, like whatever fucking shit, whatever it's packaged around, that's a sticking point. And then moving to intent, moving to being able to say something, that's a sticking point. And actually, as I brought up with direct game guys, this is the most awesome fucking retarded thing that all of them consistently run into. I'm going to be direct to open somebody, but I'm not going to be direct at any point in my life. 5 minutes later, literally. Or maybe because they're dancing around it so much with technique, like 20 minutes later or 2 hours later, they don't know how to be direct to use direction and intent in the right ways. Whereas the guys that I know that are just more naturally good with women, or have had, the guys that I know have had a lot of sex. And that's it. When you've fucked a lot, like, you get it. They all get this. Oh, she's good to go. Hey, let's go here. Oh, like, she showed this about me. Fuck, she wants to get laid. Let's make the situation happen. All right. And so that's one of the things that you got to look for. The real point is, like, once the real game of meeting people gets played in this area where it's like they showed their real self. What do I have to do with it? Okay. I know that was a lot of stuff. Sorry, I talk a lot, but let's pause here and see if you have any follow-up questions, because there were a lot of things. And of course, the more specific you can make it to you, the better advice I'll be able to give.